All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining today. My name is Heather Hoffman. I'm the federal liaison between the WestFAST and the Western States Water Council and host of today's presentation. Please note this webinar will be recorded and posted to the WestFAST tab found on the Western States Water Council webpage at westernstateswater.org. So again, feel free to share that link with those who couldn't participate today. This webinar is part of a special webinar series on wildfire communities and water resources, which will culminate in a panel discussion at the Western States Water Council meeting this fall to discuss where we go from here. This summer, we will be highlighting human health and federal funding components of wildfire. Today's presenter is Savannah Devlin. Dr. Devlin is a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences at the University of Washington. She is an environmental health scientist and biosocial scientist with expertise in respiratory physiology, environmental toxicology, air pollution exposure, community-based participatory research, CBPR, and interdisciplinary research. Dr. Devlin's research centers on understanding of impact of environmental change on communities through the interdisciplinary research themes of youth-focused CBPR, air pollution exposure, and climate adaptation. At the UW, Dr. Devlin's work has centered on the health impacts of wildfire smoke, which is increasingly problematic, though poorly understood, climate change impact affecting Western North America. Her main postdoctoral work is a collaborative project that aims to work across disciplines of forestry, climate, air quality, and health to address the climate crisis of increasingly frequent and severe wildfires. This project evaluated the health implications of smoke from both wild and prescribed fires and described the health implications of specific policies and practices related to forest and fire management. Dr. Devlin is currently working on 2 pilot grants aimed at understanding the impacts of smoke on underserved communities. Before I hand it over, I'll let you know that we will take questions at the end of today's presentation. You'll be able to use the chat feature or simply unmute yourself to speak. If as we go along and you think of a question, you can capture it in the chat and I'll be happy to read it at the end of the presentations. So with that, I'll pass it on to you, Savannah.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction, Heather. I appreciate it. I'm going to try and share my screen here. Let's see how that goes. All right. Okay, can everyone see that? Okay, I'm sharing the right version of everything.
Yes, I see it.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So as Heather mentioned, I am currently a postdoc at the University of Washington. My background is in physiology, so I'm very much from the health side of things when thinking about wildfires. But recently, when I started my postdoc 2 years ago, I again, as she mentioned, moved into this interdisciplinary project, which is what I'm going to be talking to you all about today. And really have kind of been thinking about health more as community health and how climate and specifically wildfire smoke can impact a community and how we can look at that through many different lenses. And so today I'm going to be talking about, again, this specific interdisciplinary project and a paper that we recently published at the beginning of May, which I will share some consensus statements from that paper with you all. So my project today and the title of our paper is Wildfire, Smoke Exposure, Human Health, and Environmental Justice Need to be Integrated into Forest Restoration and Management. There we go. So the audience of you all today is slightly different from the audience that I usually talk to. So I know that you all are mostly water people. I usually talk to air quality people or forestry people or health people, but we all, especially in the past several years, have experienced wildfire smoke of some kind. Smoke has touched pretty much every part of the United States. And so because we have kind of a different interdisciplinary audience today, I want to get us all on the same page and thinking about our exposure to wildfires and how we kind of think about how we need to be mitigating both wildfires and smoke. So I'm gonna ask you to participate with me. We're going to start with a little bit of an interactive event here. So if you could either text on your phone or go to this short website. So it's pollev, so pollev.com, and then /sdevlin, my last name, 884. So if you go there, and we're going to see, and it will pop up on the slide here once you respond. So I'll give you a couple minutes to kind of jump into this. But the first question, we're going to go do several questions, is you have personally experienced a wildfire smoke event? Yes, no, or you're not sure. Let's see if people respond to that. And let me know, put in the chat if that is not working. But oh, looks like someone has responded. All right, so somebody has experienced wildfire smoke event. I think this is probably going to be 100% here, but we'll see. Any questions in the chat? We're feeling okay. We're good. Is everyone able to get in? All right, so everybody has experienced a wildfire smoke event. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. So next question, you've been in the vicinity of a prescribed fire. So this is either, driving along the highway and you see a prescribed fire, or you have actually been on a burn team, or you have been volunteering with a burn team, or you've seen one in your neighborhood, somewhere near a prescribed fire. I can't tell actually from my end how many people are responding. So it could be one person responding to all these polls. We'll see. Hopefully more of you. And also, if you can't figure out the polling, you're welcome to put your answer in the chat as well.
Yeah, we're just having trouble getting to the poll itself.
Oh,
so at least
okay, yeah, no worries. I'll give you a minute or two. And I can also talk anyone through getting into it if there's specific questions.
Yeah,
It took a moment to load, but mine has loaded now.
Heather, could you just cut and paste the whole web thing in the chat so we can cut and paste it, because I'm not functioning this early in the morning.
Done.
Thanks.
It should be in there. Oh yeah, looks like some folks had a little trouble loading it.
No worries. I've got extra time.
I'm guessing you'll probably get 100% on both of these.
On this one as well, that's kind of what I was thinking. All right. All right. Tom and Roger, are we back in?
Yeah,
back in.
Yeah, but it's not showing up on your screen.
Oh, going away on my screen. All right, let's see. There we go. Let's see. Hold on one sec. Let me see if I can reset it really quick. Stop sharing for a quick second. Okay. Sorry for the technical difficulties, everyone, but it is early in the morning here. All right. How is that? Can you see that okay?
I can see it, yeah.
Okay, great. All right, I'm going to move on to the next question. We'll see if that one works okay. Oh, we got an I'm not sure. That's great.
You know, I did that just to see if another vote would be recorded, and sure enough, it was. So
perfect. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Great. Okay, so I'll move on to the next question here. All right. Next one is, you have felt a physical impact from smoke exposure, either a headache, a cough, eye irritation, any sort of physical impact from smoke exposure. This one probably will also be 100%. Yeah, I'm not sure. Great. Okay, and then just a slight twist on that question. You have felt a mental impact from smoke exposure. All right, more no's than yes in that one. All right. Oh, good, getting some varied answers here. All right, looks like it has stopped. So most people, not so much. That's interesting. Okay, next question. Do you feel prepared for wildfire season this year? It has already started in certain parts of the country and will get started, I'm sure, in the next couple months here for the rest of the country. All right, half and half. Oh, good. Okay, more people feeling prepared. That's good. Okay, so this next question is slightly different. It's going to ask you to actually put in a word, and there is kind of a annoying fluke of poll everywhere where if you try to put in 2 words, it will separate them weirdly. So I'm going to ask you to misspell things for me. And if your answer is a 2-word answer, please just spell it as 1 word, okay? So the question is, what group of people comes to mind when you think of fire management? So we're talking specifically fire here, not smoke. So if you're going to put firefighters, spell it all together, which, yeah. Perfect. Thank you. Forest Service, firefighters, yeah. So more people putting firefighters, great. Emergency management, absolutely. Government, missing the R, but I'm assuming that's what that means. Government, firefighters, emergency managers. Loggers, yeah. Lots of people putting firefighters to the biggest one there, which makes sense. That's what you think of when you think of fire management. Okay, water. Yeah, we need that too. Chris Carlson, specific person like that. Forest managers, weather forecasters, okay. Firefighters still in the lead here. But lots of different groups are involved in fire management. Okay, slight shift of the question. What group comes to mind when you think of smoke management? So shifting kind of from fire to smoke. Press, yeah. Community managers, government, air quality staff. Big fan of smoke management. Community managers, yeah. Government, okay. What government agencies, out of curiosity there? EPA, Asthmatics. More people putting government. City managers, okay. All right, I slowed for a second there. Oh, we got some more. EJ communities, absolutely. That's a nice transition into our next question. What group of people comes to mind when you think of community wildfire preparedness? That phrase, community wildfire preparedness, what do you think of? Also, thank you for participating with me this early in the morning. I appreciate it. Emergency managers, absolutely. NGOs. More emergency managers. County compliance staff, yeah. Any other groups? FEMA. Firefighters again, absolutely. Those can go across the board here. More emergency managers. Okay, so the final question, I think, yes, is who do you think should be responsible for preparing community for communities themselves? Yeah. Local leadership, everybody, yeah. Politicals, everyone, communities. Division of Air Quality. County, state, fire managers. I think it is super interesting that in this group of people, nobody has said public health. Public health has not come into the realm yet. Politicals, everyone, yeah. I mean, we all need to be preparing each other, absolutely. All right, we may have stopped there. Okay, that was the last question. Again, thank you for participating in that with me. Hopefully it kind of got you started thinking about what different groups are really involved when we talk about forest fire, smoke management, community preparedness. Again, I am in the Department of Public Health at University of Washington, and so that's kind of the lens that I take, but I love giving these questions to different groups of people and seeing what groups pop up. And when I talk to my peers, it's all about public health. And so having kind of this different perspective is exactly why we wrote this paper. So hopefully that will come all together as I continue to talk. So first thing I want to talk about is the importance of fire management. I'm probably kind of preaching to the choir with this group, but this science is really clear that by restoring the natural role of frequent low-intensity fire in our forests, by using both ecological thinning and also prescribed fire, that we can really dramatically improve the outcomes for wildfires that we know will burn. However, when you ask the public health people this, there's a different perspective. We're usually much more concerned about smoke and concerned about using other types of forest management that do not produce more smoke. And so there's kind of this difference between the people that are thinking about people health and the people that are thinking about forest health. And the people that are normally thinking about forest health are not so concerned about the smoke or the health impacts of smoke. But health impacts of smoke are definitely there. And for most communities, this increased level of smoke exposure that we have experienced over the last 10 to 15 years feels relatively new. So there's this this misconception that we don't know that much about the health effects of smoke exposure, but in all honesty, we really do. There is so much data about the health effects of air pollution. And wildfire smoke is a version of air pollution. It has a lot of the same components as traffic-related air pollution or agriculture-related air pollution. And we can make a lot of inferences, but there's also quite a few studies going on about the health effects of wildfire smoke. And some of those things that we see are the respiratory health effects, the cardiovascular effects. Those are the ones that come up automatically. Those are more kind of thinking about chronic health effects. As you all mentioned at the beginning, there's some kind of acute effects that we all feel when a smoke event rolls through: coughing, difficulty breathing, soreness, or headaches. But there's also studies going on that have shown some impacts of wildfire smoke exposure can have an impact, again, on your mental health, but can also have an impact on the reproductive health of people. And so really, there's so many different ways that wildfire smoke can impact our bodies. And so we need to be thinking about this from the human health side of things as well. So during a large smoke event, everyone is exposed to smoke. However, as with other air pollutants, smoke is not going to impact everyone equally. So exposure sensitivity is what we usually think about first. So who are the most vulnerable populations when it comes to exposure itself? And those are the people with pre-existing conditions. So children with asthma, older people with COPD. Age really has an effect. So elderly people and children are the most susceptible to wildfire smoke exposure. Where people work and live. If you are an agriculture worker and you're working outdoors during the summer, during smoke season, you're going to have more exposure sensitivity than someone working inside in a well-ventilated office. But the second piece, this adaptive capacity piece, is something we really need to take into consideration when thinking about risk. And the question is, how able is a person or a community able to adapt to a smoke event? And within a single community, risk can be completely different among neighbors, right? If someone's house is really old and not well insulated, they're going to have a lot more indoor pollution during fire season than someone that has a brand new, well insulated house. Education really comes into play. If you don't understand what the health effects of smoke exposure are, you're probably not going to be protecting yourselves. Access to transportation, access to masks and healthcare, all those different things affect the adaptive capacity of a person and a community. And so putting together exposure sensitivity and adaptive capacity is incredibly important in order to evaluate what the risks of smoke exposure really are. So, as I kind of said, we have these two different perspectives that come in, the public health side and the forest side. And unintentionally, these are somewhat adversarial. It's an adversarial relationship. We have both sides that feel like there need to be trade-offs. From the forest restoration perspective, people are thinking we need to burn more in order to help forests and build more resilience for this warming climate. And from a public health perspective, we need to use other management techniques besides fire in order to minimize smoke exposure for vulnerable populations. And so we have kind of this butting of heads between these people thinking about forest health and thinking about human health. And so I recently attended and presented at the Northwest Fire and Smoke Symposium over a month ago now. And I did a similar poll with people who spend their lives thinking about wildfire and smoke, and asked them what assumptions people bring about prescribed burning. And remember, this is a group of individuals who live and breathe fire and live and breathe smoke, quite literally. And I got such a range of answers from them. So I got people who were saying that prescribed fires are really dangerous. We need to use other management techniques. To people saying that we need to be burning 10 times more than we're burning now, 10 to 100 times more. And other people saying, I don't really understand what the management techniques are. And so this really demonstrated to me that there's really a disconnect between disciplines. And so we need to be working to bring all these different disciplines that are thinking about fire and thinking about smoke together. So we have been trying to do this. And the way that we approached this was turning to a group called Science for Nature and People Partnership, or SNAP. And SNAP was launched back in the early 2000s, and it was a partnership between the Nature Conservancy, the Wildlife Conservation Society, and the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis. And the idea of this funding, it's a funding mechanism was to really bring together different disciplines to solve an interdisciplinary problem, to bring together diverse groups of scientists. And so we applied for SNAP funding, and we is this large group of people. So our working group was a huge collaboration between universities, NGOs, federal and state level organizations, and the two PIs on the group was someone from the Nature Conservancy and someone from University of Washington. And what our goal was to see how can we integrate public health and health equity into forest and fire management? How can we bring these seemingly different disciplines together to think about how we can improve both forest health and human health? And this is a list of the organizations, and there was probably in the end about 50 plus people in our full working group. So within this larger group project, we had 3 work streams, one of which was a framework paper, which I'm going to be talking through with you today. And when we first got together virtually, our whole SNAP working group was virtual. We started at the beginning of 2020, which was supposed to be a 3-day workshop all in person, and clearly that did not happen. But actually, I mean, there was some pros and cons to the virtual nature of the working group, but we got to meet much more frequently virtually than we would have otherwise. And so with this paper specifically, we started talking about what we wanted to bring, and every different discipline wanted to just kind of put as much information into the paper as possible. And so the draft was probably about 5 times longer than the end piece ended up being, because everyone wanted to say something. And what we had to do was kind of back up and realize that there were overlaps in our work, and where this overlap really was in smoke. And so how could we find a common ground in how we approached smoke exposure, smoke creation, and come to some sort of agreements on how we thought about smoke and smoke management. And so our goal became to find a common ground and provide this transdisciplinary view of how forest and fire management, specifically forest and fire management that uses smoke, intersects with human health through the impacts of smoke, and then articulate a need for a more integrated approach. So we did that. We have this wonderful paper now. It was published at the beginning of May and has had a lot of traction since then. If you haven't read it, I will share the link at the end of the talk. But we published it in Current Environmental Health Reports, and it's been accessed over 2,000 times, which I feel pretty proud of at the moment. And so one of the main things, like I said, our goal was to find common ground. And how we ended up doing that was to create a list of 6 consensus statements that we could say from all these different perspectives. We have forest health people, fire health people, air quality people, public health people, all in the same room talking. And these are 6 statements that we can agree on that we should be using moving forward as we try to integrate public health into forest and fire management. And so for the next 6 slides, I'm going to read through the consensus statements, and excuse me for reading off the slides, but the wording understandably took a long time to get to. And so how each of these is worded is actually really important. So that's why I'll read directly off. So our first statement was, we recognize the need to listen to and integrate a diversity of perspectives, in particular those embodied by Indigenous peoples who have successfully used fire as an ecological tool for thousands of years. So this was agreed on pretty quickly that this should be our starting point, that we need to be listening to more Indigenous perspectives. We need to not only be listening, but integrating into our models and into our planning. And one example of how we did this is we had a spin-off project of our SNAP project where a colleague and I were working in the Okanagan Valley, which is in north central Washington. And we worked with the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation in order to understand risk perception of smoke in the region. And so how do people think about smoke exposure? What are the tools and resources that they have access to or not? And one of the questions we asked was, what are people's perceptions of prescribed burning? And it was really interesting seeing the difference between the tribal members that we interviewed versus the non-tribal members we interviewed. And from the tribal perspective, thinking about prescribed burning, there was a much more action-focused answer. So how do we get more people on our burn teams? How do we get more money to bring to support prescribed burning? Whereas the non-tribal members of our interviews were much more focused on caution and preparedness. So what do we do if smoke from a prescribed burn comes into our community? Or how do we make sure that the Forest Service is burning under appropriate conditions? And that showed kind of, a different perspective that we found really interesting. All right, our second statement, prescribed fires in addition to managed fires for resource benefit are both necessary management techniques to keep forest resilient and to lessen the negative ecological and public health impacts of wildfires. So this was one of those fundamental truths that the forest and fire disciplines came in with that did not immediately sit well with the public health folks. And as someone who did her dissertation in the health effects of air pollution, it didn't really sit well with me immediately either. But there were many misconceptions in our group about how other types of management strategies could be just as effective, and that needed to be broke down. And through many discussions, one-on-one discussions, smaller group discussions, we kind of pulled this out as a fundamental truth, like we're not going to move forward unless more prescribed burning is used. And we were able to do that, which was really, really exciting that some of the stronger public health voices, when we asked at the end of the paper what some of their takeaways were, this was one of the author's takeaways was, from a public health perspective, it was kind of amazing to come to this point of understanding that we need more burning in order to mitigate the effects of wildfire smoke. And that was a really strong voice in the group, and so it was great to hear that we were able to do that for her. All right, our third one, certain regions of the western U.S. will experience more smoke days with heightened use of prescribed and managed fire. However, we expect the impacts of smoke exposure to be reduced over the long term in comparison with untreated land burned by wildfires. With these techniques, exposure in affected communities can be planned and lessened. Community response plans have been developed and been used throughout the Pacific Northwest and other regions, and they're getting more and more interdisciplinary, which is great. The City of Bend has a community response plan for smoke exposure that involves fire managers, air quality regulators, public health agencies, state and local, and we really need to kind of push more of this planning in order to move forward. All right, the fourth statement, no degree of smoke exposure is without risk. However, additional investment in advanced preparation for affected populations can lower associated health risks. A smoke-resilient community is resilient to smoke from any type of fire. So similar to my perspective from the public health side, this was a statement that was kind of taken not so easily from the forest and fire folks, because there's kind of this idea that there's smoke on a spectrum, right? It's like prescribed fire smoke is not so bad, wildfire smoke is horrible, which to some extent it is, but a little bit of smoke is also not good. And so I remember there was a statement made from a forest manager at the beginning where they said people just need to get used to the smell of smoke. And there was a lot of pushback to that from the public health folks. And so this was, again, one of those fundamental truths that came from the other side that took a while to break down. But when we were able to talk about building smoke resilient communities and how can we get people to be more prepared for this smoke exposure that is, going back to statement 2, is needed, that's how we're going to be able to move forward. The fifth statement, we must work to promote both equity in process, who has a say in decision making, and equity in outcomes, who gets exposed to the smoke, within those communities and populations experiencing disproportionate impacts from smoke. So who is in the room when decisions are being made, and then who is being impacted by these decisions? As I talked about with kind of the exposure sensitivity and adaptive capacity. There's a lot of community members that may not have access to traditional channels of communication, or they're outside all the time and being exposed much more than other people. And so how can we take into consideration these different populations are being exposed and make sure that our planning process and our communication and education process is able to touch all of these communities? And our last statement is we are missing opportunities for positive impact by working as separate disciplines. We recommend that further and intentional integration of forest, fire, and health disciplines, including practitioners, tools, and resources, needs to occur to lessen the human health effects of smoke exposure due to prescribed and managed fires. So this is kind of what I've been talking about all along, right? We need to be working together in order to further this work. And one of the things that we did as a spin-off project from this paper was to kind of take it from this high level kind of thought process that we were going through down to the people that are actually working in the field on this, the practitioners and managers that are in the local health departments, that are in the local forest management and fire departments, and talk to them about these consensus statements and see, does this really make sense? And so I'm going to just super briefly go through an overview of an engagement workshop that we had in Okanagan County, which is again in north central Washington, in order to bring all those practitioners and managers in the room together. So the goal of this workshop was, as I mentioned, to bring together practitioners and managers from Washington State to foster new and interdisciplinary relationships and partnerships in order to integrate public health into forest and fire management. So one of the things that when we were doing research for the framework paper and talking to forest managers and public health departments was that they don't really know who each other are. And so even if they want to improve communication, it's difficult. And so we wanted to create an environment where we could facilitate those introductions and facilitate those collaborations moving forward. So the workshop participants, this is the breakdown of participants. It was mostly forest and fire and public health people. We had a couple of government agencies. Academia was mostly people from the University of Washington who were helping to facilitate, and then air quality people as well. And it was a hybrid workshop. So we had 19 people in person in Okanagan County and then people that joined online as well. And how we kind of went about the workshop is we had presentations from local experts. So a local forest management, a local air quality, and a local community health group. And then we had small group discussions to kind of talk through the different consensus statements, make sure that they made sense. And then the next day we actually had a field trip led by a local tribal member onto the Confederate Tribes of the Colville Reservation to show different management practices that they have been using in the Okanagan Forest up there. And something that happened during this workshop, which I think was a really wonderful demonstration of Consensus Statement 6, was at the beginning with these presentations, we had an air quality person present who was very opinionated on the fact that prescribed fire needs to be lessened, and a forest management person who was sitting in the back and mumbling under their breath about how hypocritical that was and how we were not going to move forward with this type of attitude. And it was a little tense at the beginning, honestly. And through the course of the workshop, we kind of worked out all of those preconceptions. And by the end of the day, those two were sitting at the same table discussing how they could collaborate on future work. And that was a nice highlight for me as the facilitator. So the outcomes, in addition to that little snippet I just shared with you, is we asked questions of the participants, and the majority of participants made meaningful connections during the workshop, which is really our main goal. We wanted people to get to know each other. And 76% of participants said that they would be following up with someone as a result of the workshop, and 90% of those said that they would be crossing disciplines in order to do that. So that was really another highlight for us. The last question that we asked of people during the workshop was, if you were 10 times bolder, what big idea would you recommend? So how can we move this field forward in meaningful ways? And I'm going to share 3 of the answers with you. And the first one seems pretty simple, but as I have mentioned is maybe more difficult, is create long-lasting collaborative partnerships, need a foundation of trust among participants. And to develop that trust, we need to be kind of breaking down these misconceptions, understanding those fundamental truths from both sides. Secondly, we need more robust communications for group public outreach, more robust communication group for public outreach and education, more use of prescribed burns, bigger programs and resources, and larger outreach on the benefits of prescribed burning. And finally, we need to build smoke-ready communities. So create new organizations, state level with communication experts, project managers, consultants to provide community support and smoke action plans, and make this be interagency funded. So DOH, ecology, DNR, bringing together all these different groups to make sure that we have the support and the funding from these agencies as well. So that's actually how I'm going to finish, is give you those ideas on how we're thinking about moving forward. And again, this working group is just kind of the beginning. And so we're trying to figure out what our next steps are as far as taking these consensus statements and putting them into practice in communities that are most impacted by smoke. And with that, I will open it up to questions from you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Savannah.
Yeah.
Let's see. You can unmute yourself and ask your questions directly, or raise your hand, or use the chat, and I'll read your question out loud. So let's see if folks have questions.
I'll start off because I can't type fast enough to get the question out. So I'm Roger Gorky from EPA's Office of Water, and so my question is about the distance aspect of prescribed burns, and like the communities right next door to where the burn is versus 10 miles, 50 miles, 100 miles downwind. So how far, when your last couple slides are talking to the community and getting more engagement, so how far are you guys thinking? I mean, obviously through the the polling, everybody should be involved in it, but how far is an appropriate kind of distance that you guys were thinking about engagement with the educating communities, etc.? Does that make sense?
That's a great question. And I think really the goal would be to educate any community that is impacted by smoke, regardless if it's from prescribed fire or wildfire. And so obviously one of the big differences between wild and prescribed fires is that the smoke from wildfires travels way, way further, whereas prescribed burning, it is mostly contained within a community. And if a burn is done properly, it shouldn't really reach beyond the bounds of the adjacent community. And so I think as far as communicating specifically about, this prescribed burn is happening on this date, our goal would be to just share that with the community that is immediately adjacent. I don't know if we need to go 100 miles down the road to tell them that. But I think that preparation for smoke exposure should be something that is much more widespread. Regardless, I think that those are kind of two separate things, like planning and sharing with your community. Yes, a prescribed burn is going to happen. This is what you can do, versus smoke season overall is going to be really big. Here's how all of Washington State needs to be prepared. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. So Catherine has a hand up. Go ahead, Catherine.
Hi, thank you. I'm calling in from New Mexico with the New Mexico Environment Department, and I was linked into the call because I'm the tribal liaison, and we have a number of fires, and there's efforts to coordinate with tribal governments in preparation for fire growth going towards their boundaries. And so I chose to select the verbal question opposed to writing because I'm still thinking this out, and I appreciate your public health approach, which to me is so much of that preventative, personal, steps you can take in advance, the planning angle. And I don't usually find there are many federal agencies involved until such time as you are in a more active or reparative stance. And so when I saw some of the responses earlier about FEMA and EPA coming in early, I was like, really? So I'm interested to hear how you integrate, because you are coming at it from a public health perspective, which is welcome, but it's also carries the burden, I think, so often of what people are and communities are to do for themselves, this preventative precautionary approach. And that's supposed to be done up front, and fed and state government agencies rarely get involved in the in that assessment work, and then only get involved in the more responsive or reparative work. So how can you help me think through how to better prepare, like you said, for your state? Here in New Mexico, we still have a number of fires going, and it's just like, how do we better prepare and involve state and federal agencies before the prescribed burn to make sure that we are really doing that planning phase appropriately, so we're not just blaming each other when the prescribed burn gets out of control, which has happened in 2 of our fires, and then spend so much time pointing fingers. It's like so antagonistic. So I'm just kind of interested to hear, how do you get federal and state governments on board early in the planning phases for prescribed burns? What strategies do you use to get them involved early? Thank you.
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. And I will do my best to answer it. I think something that we have talked about a lot is that, and we have learned from communities a lot, and this is what you're mentioning too, is that smoke season is like we are not really prepared for it, and then suddenly it is here, and then as soon as it ends, people just don't want to think about it anymore because it has been so traumatic. And so there's no kind of in between preparation for what's going to happen inevitably the next summer. And so something that has been, so our like regional EPA offices in or departments in Washington have been involved in like doing kind of more bigger picture activities when it comes to smoke, and really more for wildfire smoke, but I feel like this could work for prescribed burning as well. Is like, we have a smoke ready week in Washington state where we have different days where we kind of go through, and it's EPA funded, where we talk about the different, like, what is prescribed burning? What are the health effects of a smoke? How are ways you can prepare yourself for smoke exposure? And so kind of, I would say that it might be more useful to think about smoke more broadly rather than thinking about just prescribed burning or just wildfire smoke. I was actually at or attended an EPA webinar yesterday talking about smoke ready communities, which I was so grateful for, because there's usually so much about fire ready communities or fire adaptation. And so this idea of thinking specifically from an EPA perspective about building smoke ready communities, and that statement of a community is prepared for smoke from any type of fire is really, really true, right? So if you prepare yourself or you prepare your community for smoke season, then they'll be prepared for prescribed fire season as well. As far as that antagonistic and going back and forth or blaming, gosh, that is so hard. And I think understandable with what has happened in New Mexico recently. And so I think, I think that is a good reason that we need to continue to make this more interdisciplinary, right? If we can kind of bring in all the different people that are actually working to promote both forest health and fire health, there'll be less, well, this is the one person responsible, if we're all kind of in the room discussing it when it is happening. So I think, bringing on the public health people earlier, bringing on the community managers earlier would be useful. Hopefully that answers your question at least a little.
Yes, thank you. And I do think your interdisciplinary approach is a welcome one. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how you mentioned how we are impacted so heavily by the smoke at the time, and then we want to forget about it later. I think that's a really important piece of the human element here, and that, we do want to enjoy the smoke-free time when it's here, but I think we can continue to talk about it and have conversations and educate people when the smoke is absent. And yes, it's a reminder, but it'll be back every year, so
Exactly.
we need to be ready, right? Yeah. So we have another question in the chat too. The question is, have you connected with the White House Interagency Work Group on Wildfire or anyone in it? This is from Roger.
I have not specifically, but we do have one member of our working group who is in it. But yeah, I haven't talked with her recently about it. So that's a good reminder for me to do so.
Well, we should probably help get, because some of our folks in our air office are actively participants. So
oh, great. Okay.
Just want to make sure that there's information going, when you find out about stuff on the ground and new research, etc., making sure that gets funneled upwards.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Thank you. That would be great.
All right. Other questions?
So on the question of, prescribed burn versus other forest management practices, I probably know the answer to this question, but I thought I'd ask it anyway. Did you all figure or try to figure out or look at different, not necessarily a ranking, but where, well, if we shouldn't do a prescribed burn, here's our next best option? Or is it just thinning? Or what is it? What are the different other forest management techniques that might be appropriate if you want to minimize, maybe that's the question, what are other management techniques if you want to minimize smoke in vulnerable communities?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually have a modeling piece. So one of the work streams is a modeling work stream that is looking at different combinations of management techniques. So prescribed burn, thinning, pile burning, kind of putting all of those together and seeing which combination leads to the most and least exposure. And that work is in the process at the moment. So fingers crossed there'll be a paper out in the next couple months that is kind of talking through what the different risk outcomes from each of those combinations are. So yeah, that's in the works, and I'll keep you all in the loop when that paper comes out.
Yeah, because I noticed one of the slides, it might have been one of your first consensus statements that somebody just asked about as well. Catherine asked about finding those consensus statements. One of them had a picture that said no treatment, thinning plus prescribed burn, and then I forget what the other one. Maybe it was just prescribed burn. So is that an actual? Yeah, is that an actual picture or?
It is an actual picture from Oregon. It's in. I can share that again. Let's see. Yeah, this is a picture that I got from the Nature Conservancy, and I'm not going to remember which fire it was, but I can share that with you. You can see that it's a very cool picture. So showing a wildfire that went through, again, in Oregon, but I don't remember which fire it was. But this top part of the picture was no treatment. So the wildfire, clearly there's sections of just complete black here. Thinning plus prescribed fire, which we have a green, wonderful, healthy forest in the middle, and then only thinning. So really it's this, this picture shows that it's this combination of management techniques right here that is the key. Yeah.
Yeah, because it looks like the thinning they're just not healthy trees. So maybe the prescribed burn helps kill some maybe pests or something.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. And also I posted the link to our paper in the chat, and all the consensus statements are in that paper. So if you are looking for those before the recording comes out, you can read our whole paper right there.
And bump you up from 2,000.
Exactly. Go even further.
It's all about the views.
Always.
I don't want to monopolize, but everybody knows I usually have a million questions. But so you mentioned that at the beginning that you were being funded through a grant. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah.
Are you at liberty to say, was it from
So it was through Science for Nature and People Partnership. So we got the grant through that funding mechanism.
Okay.
It was a SNAP grant.
Yeah, because our Office of Research and Development also has done a lot of air smoke, wildfire smoke studies, and that you're probably aware of. So I just didn't know if it was, through one of our mechanisms or where your funding came from. So.
Yeah, so the original project was, SNAP funded. And then we've had several spin-off projects through then, mostly pilot projects through University of Washington, and then a couple TNC funded and one EPA funded as well.
Do you see that you found support to perhaps expand it across the nation, into other areas that are experiencing significant wildfires?
Yeah, I mean, that is kind of the hope. One of the things that we talk about in the paper is that we really would like to see more interdisciplinary funding mechanisms. And that is something that's really cool about SNAP, is that it is very intentionally interdisciplinary. Like the point of the funding mechanism is to bring together all these different groups of experts. But a lot of funding, as you all know, is very geared toward a discipline. So even like within the fire world, you apply to structure fire funding or forest fire funding or WUI fire funding instead of being more broad. And so that's something we would like to see a lot more of, is more specifically interdisciplinary mechanisms.
Yeah, and I think, as managers, both at the state and federal level, I think bringing it into the conversation, like where is the human health perspective, could help kind of trigger that, at least from our end. It's a good question to ask as we work together on these projects.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, any other questions before we wrap up? Well, then we'll conclude the webinar for today. Thank you so much, Savannah, for this fantastic presentation and a great discussion. And thanks everyone for joining. Feel free to share the link once I have it posted, and I'll try to get that up as soon as possible.
Great. Thank you so
Have a
much
great
for
day,
having
everyone.
me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much.